Just wanted to do a quick little video about installing the Smart PID system in my Brewzilla 65 liter brew kettle. Eating works. Most important thing, relax, have a homebrew. Don't mind if I do. So what we have here is a Smart PID controller being retrofit into my Brewzilla 65 liter. And the instructions are all dealing with an Italian or European version of these called the Klarstein, and they're wired considerably different. This is how I did it, assuming this all works. I've done some testing and it looks like it will, but before I buttoned it up. So added a ground so that we could pull grounded AC power to the 12 volt power supply that provides power to the Smart PID. What I did is line neutral runs through the protection circuit, then hits the line neutral side of the heat coils. Power comes off of the live side of the AC, and it is connected to the SSR, and I used that seemed to be the most solid connection to grab multiple points of power for the 220. So that's where I run power for the relay that controls the pump and run that over. That's in relay 1. And I also grab the hot side for the power supply. So that SSR then switches to all three power banks. It is a 40 amp SSR. This is only drawing 20 amps or 30 amps total. So it should be just fine to run all three coils, and it does appear that it is. I haven't put any stress test on it yet. I'm a little worried about this switch. Brewzilla doesn't really run mains through that switch usually, but the Klarstein has the exact same switch on it, probably made in the same factory in China, and it's running 220 mains through that same switch. So if I stress test it and something goes kablooey, it'll probably be that switch, in which case I'll defeat it because, well, I mean, how many brew kettles are out there without heat protection switch? My guess is a lot. SSR control comes off of here. The real pickle to get things wired up, at least for me, was getting the new thermocouple, thermal sensor in there, the NTC anyway. Those are spring-loaded connections, and that's not spelled out anywhere in the manual and not really obviously apparent until you start messing around with them. But that's how I wired it. And, well, if you don't hear from me, it means I got it wrong and it blew me up. But like I said, I've already tested it. I fired up the coils for just brief seconds because they're dry. And now I'm going to button it back up and flip it over and do some PID setting. What's the word? Auto tune. There we go. Anyhow, it's getting late. I'm gonna have some homebrew, button this up, and test it later. All right, I just wanted to show this with the insulation jacket added back and point out a couple things for the Brewzilla, and I assume this would be the case. The Klarstein conversion doesn't talk about an insulation jacket. This wasn't particularly well installed on mine. There was a big gap. It was sort of half shoved in there. I've got this reinstalled pretty well. Two things to note. So I added this wire. This is a 10 gauge, and it is not thermally protected with this fiberglass siliconized wire jacket that a lot of these are. The mains isn't, but what I did is made sure that this is well separated via the insulation jacket, just to make sure that this, I think it's, what is it, T10 or something, just standard wire, house wire, is separated from the hottest elements, and and that should be fine. But the other thing is the NTC for the the temperature sensor. That's also got a short run underneath there that's not protected, but it is away from the elements, so it should be fine. But yeah, that's how it looks before I button it up. I think I'll throw a couple zip ties on here and then put the bottom on. Okay, one last thing. So in the Klarstein instructions for the Smart PID, they talk about installing this on one of these legs. Now, I don't know if this is true for that other unit, but for the Brewzilla, they use really long screws to attach the bottom through these legs. The only position that would put that away from the element on there runs this screw right down into the circuit board connections on the side of it. So I went ahead and mounted it with a little extra 3M double stick tape underneath these switches sideways. It doesn't appear that it's going to come off, and even if it did, it would just fall and rest on the base. It's grounded, so I don't think it's going anywhere, and it's a lot better than running a screw into the circuit board. So at this point, I got the unit buttoned back up and did some testing, and while everything worked, the elements, was able to auto-tune the PID, the pump worked, I had a real stickler of a problem getting things to jive on Wi-Fi. I could start some basic functions on Wi-Fi, and then all of a sudden it would drop out, and I couldn't really get to the bottom of it. So I emailed David at Smart PID, and he sent me back notification they were having a problem with the pump on some of these units, creating a EMI, an interference radio frequency burst that would knock out the Wi-Fi. So we did some back and forth on trying to find a way to fix that. First, one thing that's not readily apparent is the fact that the Smart PID app only really works when you're in the run mode, whereas the BrewFather app actually can activate the brew kettle whether it's in the run mode or not. So some of my problem was the fact that my testing was that I wasn't using the app properly. Once I figured that out, though, we had to get to the electronics of trying to sort out the electromagnetic interference. The first solution that David suggested was a 1,000 picofarad capacitor. They call them condensers in Europe, and Smart PIDs from Italy. But I knew that already, so he wanted to have me put the condenser in parallel with the pump as a way of absorbing the EMI, snubbing the current inrush, and dealing with that. I didn't have a high enough voltage 1,000 picofarad. I did have a couple of 560s rated to, I think, 1 kV, 1,000 volts. So I paired those up and used those. That didn't solve the problem, though. I still had the Wi-Fi being knocked out every time the pump was cycled, whether it was switched manually or switched via the Smart PID unit. So the next attempt at a solution, and the one that ultimately worked, was to buy an off-the-shelf EMI filter off of the good old Scamazon and install it in line right behind the switch, isolating the pump through the filter network. And this solved the problem. I was able to cycle the pump manually with the switch, with the apps, with the Smart PID onboard switching menu, and it appears to be working great. So I got a brew day scheduled, and we'll be giving it a shot. And a big shout out to David and the Smart PID team in general. It's a great product, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. The original Brewzilla kettles, they're an on-off algorithm for temperature control, and I just didn't find that to be fine enough control, and I can see a lot of potential for this unit. I'll be talking to David and looking at some possible upgrades. I have a kettle that I use as a fermentation vessel at times, and the original controller on board for that defaults to boil if there's a power reset. I've had it tried to scorch things, but with a fine enough control, especially with a PID control, it could be used for fermentation temperature control. Um, so I think there might be some room for some collaboration here. So that's what I'm hoping to see, and I really want to thank him. He credited me for the amount for the EMI filter, and has been a huge help. Customer service has been great. So if you're thinking about taking this dive, I hope this little bit of information is useful. Hit me up in the comments if you need a little bit more guidance or have some questions. And if you're thinking about taking the Smart PID plunge, with one of these all-in-one kettle solutions, I think it's worth it. I'll give a little bit more of a rating and a review after I've had some actual brew days on this, but the tests are in, and it can control that temperature really well, cycling the pump, and with BrewFather, you have an all-in-one solution for being able to create and execute a recipe exactly as you intended, which gives you repeatability, which gives you better beer, which is a godsend. You know it. Well, thanks. I know it's kind of been a shoddy video for a first video on a new YouTube channel, but I hope it's been informative and useful to somebody out there. One of my goals is I've been finding little gopher holes on the internet, and I'm just trying to fill them in where I can with little projects that I do. That's going to be the goal moving forward, to fill in the little holes in the turf out there on the interwebs. And hopefully somebody will find it useful. I know that some of this content would have been useful to me. And so somebody's got to be out there, because there's literally billions of you. All right. Take care. Yeah. Thanks.